Well, hello once again, everybody. This is Sid Fernandez, and I know you guys are so used to seeing these interviews every week or sometimes every month. We've taken a little bit of a hiatus in interviewing others as life has gotten a little bit more complicated with work and life has gotten busy. The missus is expecting a baby. We don't know whose it is yet. Just kidding. I think it's mine. But for now, guys, I'm just glad that you're here with us. I'm glad that you're back here wanting to feed your minds. As you guys know, the stories that we share here are not just of just any regular people. It's people who have a very profound story. People have something to say. People have something to teach. And I think that for a lot of us in a day where misinformation, fake news runs rampant, it's nice and refreshing to bring those professionals who are really doing the proper digging, the proper investigating, and obviously in areas that we need it the most. Today, I am humbled to bring on Dr. Michael Leone. He's the professor emeritus. It's always a tough word for me to say. Of neurobiology in the Institute of Memory Impairments and Disorders at the University of California, Irvine. And he's also the chief scientist there. This is a gentleman who has 165 peer-reviewed papers. He has significant honors, very, very tiny ones in the National Institute of Mental Health, American Psychological Association, and he was also the professor of the year for UC Irvine, I believe back in the 2000s. And the last but not least, he was named by Stanford as one of the top 2% of scientists worldwide, which I don't know many scientists. So that's still pretty impressive that he's in the top 2%. Listen, you guys have heard from me enough. I'd like to bring on Dr. Michael Leone. Michael, how are you today, bud?
I'm good. Hi, Sid.
I know we were just chit-chatting right before we queued up, but listen, thank you so much again for doing this interview. I know that there's a lot for you to say. There's a lot of information to be provided, and I know that we have that wonderful logo to the top. Well, for me, the top left or the top right of your head, Memory Air, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But for really to kick off, I've really mentioned very little about your past and some of the awards that you've won, but I'd love to know a little bit more, and so you can share with those watching. Share a little bit more about you and your past, where you come from, how you got into science, so on and so forth.
Well, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I went to Brooklyn College because it was free, and it was also a great place to learn things. And while I was there, I got interested in how the brain works and how it controls behavior. And I moved on to the University of Chicago to get my PhD in neurobiology. And from there, I eventually came to the University of California, Irvine, and I've been here for many, many years. And I've studied all sorts of things. We were the first to note that infants on the first day of life learn about their mother's odor and become attracted to it. And we could mimic that with any odor and touch, which makes the infant know that it's the mother and not just some random odor. We eventually began to use odors to stimulate the brain. And we used what's called environmental enrichment, that is, giving individuals more stimulation, focusing on the olfactory system, but including all the other systems. Olfaction means smell. And we used it to treat children with autism. And it turned out that this is now the most effective treatment for children with autism. After 6 months, this is an at-home program. And after 6 months, the children with classic serious autism, 42% of them had a major improvement in their symptoms. And that's compared to children receiving just standard care who had 7% of them improved in a major way. So it's 6 times better than standard care. So this environmental enrichment protocol turns out to be a really powerful one. But at the same time, 42% got an improvement in their autism symptoms. 58% didn't. And it also turned out to be very difficult for some people to do the appropriate kinds of stimulation. 15 minutes or so in the morning, 15 minutes or so in the evening. But if you have 2 other kids and have 2 people with jobs, it turned out to be hard to do. So we were looking for something that could take the place of environmental enrichment, that would be easy to do, would take no time, and would be just as effective and hopefully even more effective. And that turned out to be not environmental enrichment, but olfactory enrichment. And what that means is that the olfactory system needs to be stimulated a lot. It turns out that if you don't have enough smell stimulation, that is, if you don't get enough smells during the day, and very few people in our affluent society get that, the memory systems of your brain start to deteriorate. And as you get older, the smell fibers in your nose also tend to deteriorate. And that's because they die because they've been exposed to toxins or to pollutants in the air, or you've had colds, and that also causes them to deteriorate. And as they deteriorate, it turns out that it's really important for your brain, because your brain starts to miss that important stimulation. And the reason is that your olfactory system has a superhighway directly to the memory systems of your brain, unlike all the other sensory systems. And that turns out to be important because it's like a muscle. If you don't stimulate it, you start to deteriorate the muscle. And that's the same thing with the memory systems in your brain. And it turns out that as you have less and less of this stimulation, and that occurs over time, so as you get older and older, your olfactory system deteriorates, and the memory parts of your brain start to deteriorate. And so what we did was give more olfactory stimulation every day, different odors every day. And we did this with a sort of a primitive system. And that turned out to improve the brain's function, the memory part of the brain's function. And it also improved the memory of older adults. And it turns out that other groups also did the same thing, but they did it with even more of these odors. And one group had a spectacular finding where they gave 40 odorants twice a day. Odorants are the technical term for smells. And it turns out that they actually got older adults with dementia, with Alzheimer's disease, to improve their cognitive or memory systems, which is amazing. The problem, of course, is that nobody is going to give themselves 80 of these smells every day. You have to take off the cap and turn it on and fill it with odors and all that. So we developed a device that will do that automatically. So once a month, you get a cassette with all of the odors in it. You click it in, and just before you go to sleep, you press a button. And then for the next month, while you're sleeping, it will deliver all the olfactory stimulation that you need to keep the memory parts of your brain youthful and functioning at a high level. And we think this is going to be a really big breakthrough in how people experience the kind of stimulation that they need.
Listen, we talked about this not in our our pre-interview stage as well as right before this, and we talked a lot about we've learned a lot more about symptoms. I feel like, listen, we always have side effects and symptoms of things, that we talk about those, and obviously some of the symptoms that have occurred during the time of COVID, and since it's implemented itself within our lives, obviously some of those are affecting those tracks. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to backtrack a bit, because I think what's huge is because you've really delved and you've given so much of your life into the studying of this system. So what I'd like to know, and I think many others would know, what attracted you to this specific science? Was there something in your life, or was it just kind of fell in your lap and decided, hey, I want to go to the olfactory system and how that affects neurology?
I think it was because most people just think it's a trivial system, one that is nice to have and allows you to pick the right perfume and allows you to smell wine, but it's really been thought to be not a very important thing. But it turns out to be really important for a lot of things. For example, most people think that the taste that they get when they eat food comes from the tongue. But the tongue can only taste sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and protein-like taste. And most of the real flavor that you get comes from the chemicals coming up through the back of your nose and stimulating your smell system. And that's how you get most of the flavor. if you have any doubt about this, when you have your cup of coffee tomorrow morning, hold your nose. And all you'll taste is a very unpleasant because all you're getting is the stuff from your tongue, not through your nose. So it's important from that. And if people lose their olfaction for any reason, food becomes tasteless. It's hard for them to eat. Food becomes uninteresting. It all tastes like cardboard. It's a real problem. The other thing that people don't realize is that every form of memory loss, every kind of dementia, which is the most serious form of memory loss, all of those disorders are preceded by a loss of olfaction. That is, people lose their smell ability before they develop Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, Lewy body disorder, frontotemporal dementia, all of the dementias, alcoholism, all of these things where you lose your mind, you lose your olfactory sense first.
It's it's crazy. I was reading an article, I think it was on neurology.com, and they were talking about a study that they did. They took I think it was 50 subjects, and they were all above the age of 78, and they basically started testing them. And it was very regular. I think it was per month. I can't remember all the details, but what they found was, I think it was 62% of the subjects, when they started to lose their sense of smell, this olfaction, and they were dealing with, I think it's anosmia, if I get this right, the loss of smell, boom, science for the win. So they found that they were beginning to have those pre-dementia stages in their life, those that still had their full range of smells. They found that their memory was intact. So I found it to be so incredible. It's something that, we've been hearing about dementia, we've heard about Alzheimer's, and we've heard about everything that causes it, which is what you eat, what you drink, if you're outside, this and this, but it's as simple as if you lose your smell. Yeah. So how long have we known of this? When did olfactory, or the studies of olfactory, really begin? Was it talking about back in the dark ages, or is this something still fairly new?
Well, we've known this from the 1980s, so a considerable period of time. But if you test people's olfactory sense, you can predict their all-cause mortality, that is, their death for any reason at all, by their olfactory ability after the age of 50, and that's within a 5-year time frame. You can also predict which people will develop mild cognitive impairment, which is sort of an intermediate stage between normal old people forgetting and a more serious situation. And of those people with mild cognitive impairment, you can also predict which of those will deteriorate to get Alzheimer's disease, which is the full dementia, by their olfactory ability. And so this has been something that's long known. The problem was people didn't think they could do anything about it. That is, they could just observe it, but not use olfactory enrichment to treat it. And people have known that the loss of olfaction occurs for people with Parkinson's disease years before you get any motor problems. And again, people just think that that's something that happens. And the subsequent memory problems that people with Parkinson's disease, again, just occurs, and it hasn't occurred to people to treat it with olfactory enrichment. And so we are doing that, and it turns out to be really powerful.
It's really incredible how something so simple, testing. We always talk about our muscles. If you don't train your muscles, they begin to break down. They die. The fibers start to decompose. All that good stuff. And it's funny how we forget that there's other systems at play in our own bodies that even them, they need to be trained. They need to make sure you're filling them up with the things that they need. Before we get even deeper, so you guys did an amazing job of putting together a quick video. It's about 90-second video on the olfactory system. I know we've really delved deep in some of the terminology, some of the studies. I think it would behoove the people that are watching here currently just to watch this simple video. And I think it'll allow you guys watching at home, it'll give you guys a much basic idea of what the olfactory system does. So let's kick that off.
We all know someone having trouble remembering things. We see the trouble, the discomfort, sometimes the heartbreak, which is what makes our research so important. People will try pills and exercise to help their memory problems. But exercise only works for 10% improvement, and pills only provide a caffeine-like boost. That's where Memory Air comes in. It's based on new science to improve your sense of smell, which remarkably improves your memory. We stimulate your sense of smell with a certain group of odors on a rotating basis, all while you sleep, with nothing touching you. It's designed to make you smarter. It's designed to rejuvenate the memory center in your brain. It's designed to give you a younger brain again. How can this be? The olfactory system is your biggest and fastest pipeline to your memory center, your hippocampus. Every other one of your senses must go through additional brain areas, so their influence on your memory is much smaller. Smell is so powerful that its loss precedes or accompanies all forms of dementia, including Alzheimer's. After 50, your ability to smell predicts whether you'll live or die within the next 5 years. The good news is that Memory Air was created to, or is designed to, literally improve your ability to smell. So we believe it can help you live a longer, healthier, and smarter life. Alzheimer's and dementia need a big win to stop the heartbreak. Donate generously now to make Memory Air a reality. Help people's memory.
So I gotta say, man, that was actually a really good job. I've watched it numerous times on my own because, like, man, this is so well put together. And then, listen, for those at home, we all know that there are certain wives out there that there's probably some of you that wish that your senses of smell weren't around for your husbands. But listen, it is what it is. It's a part of our life, and thank them, because at the end of the day, they are training your nose, and you may have lower chances of getting dementia and Alzheimer's. So thank them rather than hitting them across the head. But now that people have a much better idea, talk us through a little bit about this, the way that works, right? So you've got certain, I forgot what the terminology is. I want to go deep. I want to say it was, there's these little receptacles or molecules within your nose in the mucuses that capture smell. And then you can walk us a little bit through that process in the olfactory system.
So when you have odors are just molecules that are airborne, that are in the air, that you can take up when you breathe in. And way deep in your nose, there are little fibers that come down that are actually neurons that are exposed to the real world. And the only neurons in your body that are exposed to the outside world. And so they're very sensitive. And these molecules come in and they latch into the receptors on these neural fibers. And it's like a key going into a lock, right? They come in and they bind to the receptor. And when the right combination occurs, when the right key is put into the right receptor, it turns out that there are the neurons start to fire, sending information out. One of the ways that they go is they go to parts of the brain that are specialized for decoding that information and telling you which odor you've just smelled, right? So that's an important thing. And humans can smell all sorts of things. And we are very good at detecting things that are important to us. So people somehow think that humans are not as good as other animals, for example. But depending on the odor, we are just as good or better. So, for example, the odor of smoke, even in tiny billion parts per 1 part per billion, we can sense that. And it's because we've evolved to be very sensitive to fire, because we can die in fire or smoke. And we are able to detect this information and act on it very rapidly. And one of the problems with people who lose their olfactory system ability is that they can't smell things like smoke and fire, or they can't smell a gas leak. Gas, no odor. And so they put the odor of a skunk in your gas so that you are normally able to detect it if there's a gas leak. But people with no olfactory ability can't do that. And so they're in danger for that reason. But again, they put it in a very, very small amount, and humans are great at detecting that particular odor.
So I also found it very interesting that, as again, from what I read in the breakdown of the olfactory, right? So you have, let's say that molecule comes in, it's picked up by your receptacles. It takes multiple, within the bulb, there are multiple, I can't go into those terms, but you actually need multiple points, almost like points of reference saying, hey, we've now said, let's say 3 of them said, hey, we're good. This smells like coffee. it's coffee, right?
Mm.
And then the other part I found very interesting is depending on where you currently are. So in the case of food, which we always associate smells with food, if you're hungry, it's more profound. But when you're stuffed, you've just stuffed your face at Golden Corral.
Right.
Those who like Golden Corral back in the day, but Golden Corral and Shoney's, you're like, no, it's not as profound. So
Right.
I found it to be so interesting that the mind does that. It says you're not really needing of that, so we're not going to make the smell that that heavy.
Right. And so we actually found the mechanism by which this works. So when the molecule comes into your nose, there is a sheet of hundreds and hundreds of receptors that are very different and respond to different molecules. They don't actually respond to the molecule, but different parts of the molecules. And what the system does is it figures out from the different parts of the molecules what the whole molecule is like, and then transports that to the rest of the brain so it can decode that information and act on it. So if it's a bad odor like smoke, you want to know that. If it's a good odor like a rose, you want to know that. And that's what this system does. It allows it to identify these molecules by their various characteristics.
It's so interesting. And you made a point about the neurons and being the only neurons that are actually outside in the world, right? Out in the abyss, outside the body. Are there ways that we damage it aside from your your smells and your toxins? Listen, a lot of people pick their nose. Let's just be honest. Let's just be out there. Does that damage those receptors as well?
That will only damage them if you put in if you have bacteria or some sort of a germ that comes in and causes you to get an infection there, and the infection can damage those systems. But there are a lot of ways to get it. So chronically stuffed noses will result in a loss of memory because you have a loss of chronic olfactory stimulation. If you're in a car accident, the olfactory neurons have to go through very small holes in your skull to get to the back of the brain. And if you're in a car accident, you get a shearing action. And what happens is that those neurons are cut. And it's very hard for them to regenerate. And so people in car accidents, or if you've been near an explosion and that's caused your head to bounce around or your brain to bounce around in your skull, that's also a way to torque the brain and cut it off from the olfactory neurons. So people can get this damage in a number of ways. And of course, all of the neurological symptoms, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, alcoholism, all of those things can cause the olfactory system to deteriorate for different kinds of reasons.
It's crazy. Now, talk to me a little bit about some of the things that you've seen. Obviously, we live in a world that's obviously a lot more polluted than it was, 50 years ago. In your guys' trials, are you seeing that there is a specific age group, or from one age point past, are you seeing that number decrease? Are you seeing your test subjects getting younger and younger as the years go on? What are you guys seeing in that field of study?
Well, what we see is that as people age, their olfactory ability gets worse and worse. And if you take rats, you see the same thing. Lab rats will lose their olfactory ability as they get older and older. But if you keep those lab rats in a closed environment, sort of like a wind tunnel, where you clean the air perfectly before it gets to them, they don't lose any of their olfactory neurons. And so what that shows is that it's actually the processing of the pollutants in the air that is the critical factor in the loss of olfaction over time.
Wow. Have you guys noticed if there's specific toxins that are obviously much more damaging to that system? And again, toxins that let's say the standard person would be around. Well, we deal with so many toxins in our own home, whether it's hairspray, whether it's air freshener. I mean, all these different things that we're spraying into the air. Have you seen where, again, standard people like myself, what type of toxins are they putting in there that's really affecting them the most?
Well, the one that's been studied most is actually zinc. And people take zinc for trying to lessen the effects of a cold. But it turns out that high levels of zinc actually can cause the olfactory neurons to deteriorate. And so you want to be very careful when you use those kinds of pills.
Aside from the therapy that you guys are providing with Memory Air, okay, what other vitamins have you seen? Other supplements that people are taking aside from the therapy that you've seen that actually helps maintain the olfactory system, not so much repair it, but maintain it?
Yeah, there's nothing like that works for it. So the only thing that helps some people is if you have a chronically stuffed nose from allergies, and many people do, taking a cortisol spray is something that can clear that up. But other than that, there are no supplements or anything else you can do to improve the olfactory system or just maintain it.
Yeah, I'm glad I don't take as much zinc. Every time I take it, for some reason, I have like the heebie-jeebies in my stomach. Zinc does not. I mean, my body hates it. I don't know what's going on with it, but the second I take the vitamin, it's like, nope, reject. So it comes back up. Let's go back into the research. Again, it's extremely eye-opening because a lot of us don't even realize how important this system is. Okay. So what have been some of the biggest takeaways during your research time, your research period? What are some of the most astonishing things that you found, aside from the connection to your memory loss diseases? What other things have really just opened your eyes to some of the studies that you guys have done?
Well, it's been remarkable to see how effective it's been for children with autism. The people have tried all sorts of ways of trying to increase their social interactions. And there's a modest effect of that, but kids with autism turn out to have all kinds of problems. They have problems eating, they have problems sleeping, they have problems with behavioral control, they have problems with overreacting to bright lights or loud sounds. And none of these social interaction therapies do anything for that. And what we found is that we could improve the responses on all of the problems that kids with autism have. And that's really remarkable to see a kid who has very little ability. For example, they may start out being nonverbal. And then after 6 months, they're talking, they're using their social abilities. They're no longer kicking their parents or banging their head against the wall. It's really remarkable to see that. And one of the parents who was just, kept going after 6 months, which is our usual time period, they did it for 18 months. And this young woman just graduated from a top 10 liberal arts college and is now her job is, she started out nonverbal. Her job now is to facilitate the communication amongst many local groups that need this kind of facilitation. So, to see that is really remarkable, but it's also heartwarming to see it.
No, it is. I think that when you make a discovery like this and you're helping, I mean, I don't know the percentages offhand. I'll get to that now. So, because obviously you'll have those numbers, but again, we all know someone who's been affected, whether by autism, dementia, Alzheimer's. I mean, I just lost my grandfather. He was dealing with dementia issues. My grandmother, last year, the same thing. She had been dealing with dementia issues as well. I think every one of us has been touched by it. And again, it's been one of those things where it's like, well, once you get it, we'll maintain you. Here's some drugs. We'll just maintain you comfortable. And me speaking about the drug side, I'd like to segue into how was memory loss dealt with before this discovery? So, what were some of the therapies being done prior to the discovery that olfactory is directly connected to memory loss?
Well, there are a couple of medications that are given to people as they're deteriorating with their memory, and they have a mild effect, but nothing. They don't actually treat the problem. They are just treating the symptoms, and so these drugs are given, but they are just at best they slow the deterioration, but the deterioration is inevitable and it keeps on going. And so, if you're taking those medications or a loved one is taking them, keep them on them. That's good to do, but it's not going to halt the deterioration. The other thing that has been tried and does have some effect is exercise. So if you can get older adults with dementia to exercise regularly and pretty vigorously, that also can slow the deterioration. But it's hard to get older people to get on a stationary bike and go for 45 minutes. And if they do, it's they'll very often get repetitive tissue injury because they've used it over and over again without dealing with the results of doing that. And so that doesn't have much of an effect either for many reasons. But it's other than those two things, all of the supplements that are being pushed on TV are just not effective. They don't do what needs to be done. In order to really show this, you have to do the gold standard medical research, which are randomized clinical trials in which the person giving the substance doesn't know what's going on. The person getting the substance doesn't know what's going on, and they're randomly assigned to either getting the experimental drug or manipulation or not. And in most of these cases, that has not turned out to be true. And it's really important, if you find something that's positive, to replicate it and to replicate it under a number of conditions. And there's nothing that really meets that criterion.
No, I couldn't agree more. Now, you guys have obviously been doing testing for quite some time. How many subjects do you guys have? How many volunteers have you guys had a part of your guys' research throughout this entire process?
So for older adults, we have well over 100 that have done this, again, in randomized clinical trials. And we find statistically significant differences amongst them. And other groups have replicated this now. And so we feel confident that they too have done the gold standard. And so there is a growing literature of people who have published their outcomes and shown that olfactory enrichment is effective in that regard.
That's phenomenal. Again, we're in a very, very weird time with medicine and with science and trying to fact check and this and that. And it's very nice to see a collective group of scientists getting together, I think, for the greater good. What were the comments, or what were the feedback from the subjects during these times? Obviously, many of them started to feel different, but I'd love to know, or maybe even tell a story of one of the subjects, maybe one that was, I know the young lady you had told us about, but what were the feedback from them and with the studying that you guys are doing?
Well, I can tell you the story of my cousin, who is in her late 80s and started doing this. And after the 6 months were over, she said, can you send me more of these nice odors? Because I'd love to have them in my home. It helps me sleep. It helps me relax. And she, in general, said she felt a lot better. So that's just an anecdote, but and it's just one person, but it tells you that the people enjoy the experience. People like these. They're all natural, pleasant, plant-based odors. And so they like the smell of them, and it's the kind of thing that there's probably a good reason for people liking them, because their brain needs this kind of stimulation, and that's probably true throughout life. People enjoy smelling nice things all through life, and that's probably because we've evolved to do that, so that Mother Nature makes sure that we stimulate our brain with nice odors.
And listen, for those at home, I wanted to mention this because I think a lot of us, again, we're in a point where you have incense, you've got plugins, you've got all these different ways of air freshening. Though it's great, obviously, for your olfactory system, would you say that even though it's great that you're using something that smells and you're obviously training, would you say that those are still a hindrance to your olfactory system?
Yeah, no, they're fine. You're talking about a field called aromatherapy. And what that is that people pick a single odor and they give it to themselves over and over again, and it's pleasant, and they enjoy it, and it does stimulate your brain to some extent. But it turns out that the most important thing is that you get novel stimulations and that you get a lot of them, right? So one odorant is not going to fix your memory centers of your brain, but dozens of them will.
Now, you said novel odorants, right? So could you just maybe rattle off a couple in that realm, or is that a broad term that you guys use?
Yeah, so there are odors that you don't smell every day.
Okay.
So I could name them, but you wouldn't recognize them.
So basically, just listen, just think outside of your standard area, because it's the same thing. If you're working out your legs every single day, your body's going to end up being scrawny, and then you have these really thick thighs. It's the same thing as to what you're saying. If you're smelling the same thing over and over again, you like the same candle from Bed Bath & Beyond, that you're not changing up the smell, you're going to start to deteriorate another portion. Because again, I think going back to the science and the receptors, if you're not utilizing them, they're going to get fired, they're going to get cut, laid off by the brain, and now you can't use it. Would you say that's a pretty easy explanation?
Yeah, and it also is the case that putting a lot of odors together to have a big mixture, that doesn't work. You have to experience them one at a time, and the system is very particular about that. So that's why you need a mechanism for delivering single odorants, many of them, and not just combining them into a mixture.
Oh, that was actually a very good addition there. That's actually, again, going back to food, you mix all these smells and you can smell these aromas, but obviously it needs to be separate. That's huge. So how do you tell real science from junk science? I'm going to go to the actual findings and the process in doing that. For those, again, not in the science world, how do you differentiate from the two?
Well, it's hard for people who don't have years of training. You have to understand experimental design. You have to understand that you need experiments, that anecdotes don't work, and that just looking at a bunch of people and saying, well, that looks good to me. So you have to have tests to show that have been validated, that have been used and shown to predict, for example, memory, an improvement in memory. You need to have random assignment to the different groups of manipulations, so that you're not picking your friends who you want to improve, or just picking the people who look like they're smarter and putting them in the group that gets it. And people do this unconsciously. It's not necessarily that they want to manipulate the outcomes, but you have to make sure that no one is even inadvertently trying to manipulate the outcomes. And then you have to make sure that people are actually doing what you say they are doing. So if they're taking a pill, you have to make sure that they're taking the pill, because if they're not, that's a problem. Or if they're taking another substance that's similar to the pill you're giving them, that's also a problem. And you have to make sure that when you're testing them, that the tester is not aware of any kind of which group that they're in, or who this person is, or that they really want this person to do better. And so you have to make sure everything is neutral, and that the only thing that's changing is whether they've gotten your experimental change or not. And it has to be very specific to that before you can determine that it actually had an effect. Then you have to subject all of your evidence to statistical evaluations. So since you can't test the entire population, you have to take a sample of that population. And you have to make sure that you've tested enough people to show the possibility of a change. And then you have to make sure that you've used the right statistics. You don't want to lie with statistics. And then you have to make sure that you extract the appropriate conclusions from those statistics. So there's a lot of steps in this thing, and you don't want to over exclaim about what the kinds of things that you found. You want to be very accurate, and then you want to replicate it. You want to make sure that both you and other people find the same things, because you may have just something in the water that makes your group different or more susceptible to the changes you're giving them. You want to make sure that people all over the world or in different labs or in different communities can have the same outcomes. And that's really important to do. And if you get all of that and have a consistent story to tell, then I think you should be able to accept that information.
So all those people out there that are trying to do your own digging into all these different things that are happening now during COVID, leave it to the professionals. But make sure you're doing your proper research and ensuring that those are actually professionals. So thank you for that breakdown. Now, I did mention COVID. I've mentioned it a couple of times. And the reason I'm going to say it is, aside from the fact that it's one of those shock words now, it's a part of our vocabulary. It's something we now state, whether it's the C word we don't say or not. COVID, one of the biggest symptoms has been the loss of taste and obviously of smell. Is there any fear, or is there any fear right now within your community, within the olfactory science community, where now we're going to start seeing some very profound symptoms of memory loss, of issues with fog at a much earlier age due to what we're seeing with COVID?
Yeah, so there's already been an increase in the people who have deteriorated to Alzheimer's dementia. And that's almost certainly due to the COVID loss of olfaction. But people have lost their olfactory ability across the age ranges. And the big fear is that the loss of olfaction, if it doesn't return, will cause a deterioration of the memory part of the brain. And we'll see a second pandemic of memory loss that is consequent to the loss of the olfactory cues. So it's a big concern. It's too soon after people have lost their olfaction to see whether that comes. But one of the things that has been done is that this group in Britain had been doing brain imaging on a large number of people before the pandemic. And then midway into the pandemic, they realized that a lot of people who they've imaged already had COVID. They then brought them back for brain imaging. And what they found is just what people feared, that the memory parts of the brain had deteriorated in those people. And that's a very disturbing finding.
It's extremely disturbing because, again, we look at the numbers, we look at the percentages. Obviously, it doesn't affect everyone. The death rate, luckily, has been quite low. But we always look at the deaths, but we don't look at the long-term ramifications.
Yeah.
In some that are young, and again, you can speak to this, and those that are young, is there, without this therapy, without memory air, is there a chance for them to be able to regenerate that memory loss? Or basically, they've now started the decline, and as age, they basically keep going down from there? Or do they have to do the therapy to ensure that they're strengthening themselves?
Yeah. So one of the things that is important to understand is that even if you've had mild symptoms, you can have profound brain fog, memory loss, olfactory loss, kidney damage, all sorts of things. So a lot of people have damage and they don't know that they have damage. One of the things that is long been known about the loss of olfactory ability is that people don't realize it. So they can lose a large portion of their olfactory ability and not realize it. So some of the people who've lost their olfactory ability completely, now it's come back. It may only have come back a third, but now that it's somewhat normal, they just assume that everything's fine. But unless you systematically test their olfactory ability, it turns out that they could have serious olfactory loss that in turn could impact their memory over time. And so, people in their 30s could be like people in their 60s because they've lost their olfactory ability and they haven't recovered it. And that's going to impact the memory centers of their brain over time. And they may have serious memory loss well before they should.
That's astonishing. And again, something that's just not discussed. I've encountered so many people. And listen, I've had COVID twice. I know plenty of people who've had it. I mean, at this point with Omicron the way it is, it basically is going to be that everyone's going to have it. And that the term fog has been used so frequently with people. Like, I'm still in a fog. I can't shake it. I don't understand. I mean, every single day. And it's unbelievable that this science, it seems like it's very, again, it's accessible, but it's not being discussed. And that's where I think the biggest need, or the big need for memory areas, because yes, we want to make sure we're protecting the generations that are about to check out, but now we have the generations that are supposed to be continue to lay down the groundwork and the pavement for the next generations are now suffering from the issues from this virus. It's astonishing. Can you tell us about? Go right ahead. Sorry.
So we haven't used olfactory enhancement or enrichment to treat COVID-induced olfactory loss and COVID-induced memory loss or brain fog, but that's something we'd like to do.
I think it'd be huge. I just don't see why not. Again, if everything that you're saying is not if everything you're saying has been scientifically proven, we just went through all the steps as to how to make sure this is not junk science. At the end of the day, if the olfactory system is tainted, it's something that needs attention. And again, with all these people suffering from these issues, and I remember talking about this on the Zoom call we had weeks ago about how, again, you have people in their 20s dealing with fog. I know teenagers that were dealing with fog after their bout with it, and it's scary. It really is. It's scary because if this doesn't get out or I know it's your job to do that, but if more people don't get on and say, hey, we need to continue to be advocates for this type of therapy, we may be seeing a very large suffering of the next generations, because this, again, needs to be in everyone's home.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Any other illnesses that you guys have seen through your studies that this therapy, memory airs therapy, has assisted in?
We've we started a study with premature infants. So we think that's going to be an important area because these kids have a long way to go, and we can facilitate it with both odor and touch. So that's, I think, going to be an important finding. We've also had preliminary data looking at low socioeconomic status individuals who are in the 5th grade. So one of the problems that they have is they've had chronic stress. Chronic stress goes to the same memory parts of the brain and starts to make it deteriorate. And so we wanted to see whether we could improve their abilities with olfactory enrichment. And we gave them olfactory enrichment in their classrooms for 3 months, and we found a significant improvement in their cognitive ability, specifically executive function, which has to do with attention and focus. And that is really important for predicting how well they'll do in their classwork, and also is related to their IQ. And so we think that there is a big need for this kind of stimulation across many age groups, but particularly across groups of people who've had chronic stress.
That's so interesting. So I want to now get into memory air and really delve into it. Okay. So first question I'm going to say, what's the difference between aromatherapy and memory air?
So aromatherapy is when you take a single pleasant odor and you give it to yourself over and over again. And the data on that are variable. Some people think that they can improve some things, but they're very small studies that have not necessarily been replicated, where you never hear about a replication if one has happened. And they're not strong effects. So people may sleep a little better, people may feel more energized, but these are minor effects if they actually are replicable at all. What olfactory enrichment is the exposure of individuals not to a single odor, but to many odors. And it's important to have many new odors in there and to have it continue over a long period of time. And this completely changes things by inducing what we call neuroplasticity. And what neuroplasticity is that if there's a problem in your brain, this kind of stimulation induces a workaround. So it doesn't repair the damage, but it gets the other parts of the brain to take over the function that the damaged parts did before. And that allows you to recover from various neurological problems. And that looks like how it works. If you look at laboratory animals and give them olfactory enrichment, people have found that you improve the memory centers of your brain, and you also increase the number of new neurons that are produced during this period. So the olfactory enrichment actually causes your brain to make new neurons that are incorporated into the old circuits, and that's the way it does the workaround for that system.
That's so interesting. So tell us, when did Memory Air start? Obviously you've been doing the research for years, for decades, but when did Memory Air go from where a study is, now it's like, hey, there's a potential for a company here? And then when did you guys really say this is absolutely happening?
So I was talking to my good friend Alan Bernstein, who is a founder of medical marketing. He was the first one to realize that you could use the marketing techniques to show people what works for them medically. And as soon as I told him about the research that we were doing, he said, we've got to get this out into the real world. And so he suggested that we start a company and that we raise some money and that we develop a system to give this to people in a way that they could actually use it. So he was absolutely right in the thought that we need to do it at night when people are sleeping, and they need to be able to do it without any effort at all. And so that's what we've designed. We got a crack group of engineers who put this together. It's a beautiful design, and it really works. And so we are doing the final stages of the development of the device. We have started the company. We've brought in some people to help us market it and to build it. And we will be putting it out into the market within a few months.
That's unbelievable. I mean, that's fantastic. Now, for those that may have interest in olfactory enrichment, obviously we're waiting for this machine. For them, how do they go about maybe reaching out with interest to the company? Hey, listen, we would love to be on a list, or what can they expect? What can they expect to how they can acquire any Memory Air machine? Are we direct to consumer? Are we planning on going into stores? Is it direct to you guys?
So the first thing they can do is go on GoFundMe and search for Memory Air, and they can contribute to our research. But within a few months, maybe 3, we should have this available online, and anybody will be able to purchase it from anywhere in the world to be used at home, and they should be able to use it. Again, just clicking in 1 cassette a month, pressing a button, and having their brain stimulated as they sleep.
It's pretty awesome. I know a lot of people, we deal with nightmares sometimes, some wonderful dreams. Now you have a wonderful aroma while you're sleeping as well. Listen, we're getting towards the tail end here, but in your honest opinion, how important is this? I mean, this to me is life-changing, but I'm obviously not someone in science. You're in this field day in, day out. How important will this be, not for today, but let's say for the next generation to come? How important is this enrichment to us all?
So right now we're really treating it like a medical treatment. So if you have a problem with your memory, you can use this to get your memory back in shape. But I think the bigger idea is that this really needs to be, rather than a medical treatment, it needs to be a public health service. That is, people need to do this throughout their lifetime, and they need to do it every day. And that's to keep your brain young and youthful and stress-free and functioning at a high level. And my feeling is that infants need it, Children need it to improve their IQ. Young adults need it to maintain their sharpness and to be able to compete with everybody else out there. And as people get older, they definitely need it, and let alone all of the people with medical problems that need this to be treated. But it's possible that we can even prevent people from having Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and so forth if they get sufficient amounts of this olfactory enrichment early enough in their young adult life to prevent these things from actually occurring. So that's the hope. That's the big idea. And you need to think of it, I think, like people brushing their teeth. So you brush your teeth to avoid getting cavities and needing problems, needing medical attention for your gums. Going to the dentist is fine, and you should do that. But it's much better if you prevent all that stuff from happening. And my feeling is that that's exactly what Memory Air will do in the long term. People will just have it in their house, in every bedroom, and their children will be exposed to it. Their grandparents will be exposed to it, and they will be exposed to it so that we prevent these neurological problems from occurring in the first place.
And guys, for everybody watching, I know a lot of us have Alexas and all that good stuff on our nightstands. Hopefully one day, Dr. Mike and the rest of the team at Memory Air can say, hey, Alexa, turn on my Memory Air. That's how important it's going to be, because as great as it is to turn off your light or your lamp in your room without having to touch it, I can tell you having your memory for the rest of your life is going to be a big key. It may save you and give you some time back, which I think a lot of us will say it's the most important. It's the most important thing that we have. I think it's the one thing we waste the most, which is our time. So I think what you guys have created is something incredible. I think that this science needs to be promoted more. It needs to be, I hate to say mainstream media, but it should be. And at the very least, we just need to get educated as people. If what we're wanting to do is buy back time in our lives and with our loved ones, and to make sure that our lives are lived fruitful and in the best shape possible, these are the types of things we need to learn. So I thank you so much, Doc. I really do. Thank you to you guys. Thank you for the rest of your staff, the engineers, to Alan. And obviously my best friend, Rick, who is helping you guys getting the message out there. Just thank you guys for what you're doing. This is amazing.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
All right. So once again, guys, I'm going to make sure to put this up here. Go into GoFundMe. Make sure to search Memory Air, guys. This is not just some other gimmick. This is something that can save your life. This is something that can give you back time. Removing stress from our lives is something that I think we're all looking for in our lives. And if we can make the lives of our kids better, make sure you're doing it. So give back to a great cause, give back to a great company, and you may just see Memory Air in every single home, and we sure as hell hope so. So thank you once again, and again, thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure.